Our next storyteller, Tom Harrington, Privileges and Potential Embarrassments in Naming New Species of Fungi.
Thanks, Michael. So I'm a forest pathologist, and sometimes we run across a new undescribed forest disease, a tree disease, and it's caused by an undescribed species of fungus, and we need to name it. Other times there'll be one species of fungus that we study further and realize it's 2 or 3 different species of fungi, and we need to name those new species too. The process of naming new species of fungi can be quite tedious. There's a lot of background work that has to be done, and there's very strict rules of nomenclature on how you name these new species of fungi. So as an example, we described a new disease on bur oak trees here in Iowa. We found that the disease was caused by a new species of Tabacia, and we named it Tabacia iowensis because it was native to Iowa. As we were doing our work, we found that there were other species of Tabacia that also needed to be described on other species of oak trees, and as is common in mycology, we named these fungi after deceased colleagues. That's a pretty common thing. We don't name them after living colleagues, we just name them after dead colleagues. And so there were 3 professors at Iowa State University, Lois Tiffany, Sandy McNabb, and Rick Hall, and we named these 3 species after them. Now, Tabacia is not my favorite fungus. It's really Ceratocystis. Ceratocystis has been my favorite fungus since 1977, when I was 25 years old. So I just finished my bachelor's degree in plant pathology at Colorado State University, and I had a summer job working for the U.S. Forest Service at the Rocky Mountain Research Station for the forest pathologists there. And one of the things I did as part of my duties was transfer the culture collection. It had to be done each year. So we'd take the cultures out of the refrigerator, plate the fungi out on agar media in Petri dishes, see that they were growing okay, and then we put them in new fresh tubes and stick them back in the refrigerator for another year. And we did this in a cramped little room. Tommy Hines was the fellow I was working with. And while we were working in there, Tommy would either be smoking his pipe or he'd have that pipe packed with this aromatic cherry-flavored tobacco, pipe tobacco. And his breath always smelled of this cherry-flavored tobacco. I mean, it was really quite nauseating when we're in this little room and I've got this smoke and smell of cherry, and then the Bunsen burner's on, the room is hot, it's no windows, and Tommy could see I was getting a little bored with the whole thing, and he says, "Here, take this Petri dish and crack it open and stick your nose right down in it and tell me what it smells like." And I thought, I'm not going to be able to smell anything with this cherry tobacco, but I cracked it open, and boy, there's a big whiff of banana that came out, a little bit of acetone that was mixed with it, and very powerful aromatics. And I couldn't imagine why this fungus would be so smelly. And he said, well, this is an insect-dispersed fungus. And the fungus produces these smells to attract insect vectors that come in, they feed on the spores, they pick up the sticky spores, and then if they visit a wound on a fresh aspen tree, they'll inoculate the tree, and the fungus grows and kills that tree. And he goes, wait till tomorrow. We're going up into the woods. I'm going to show you some trees I inoculated, and you can see for yourself. So the next day, we hopped in a Forest Service truck, green, of course, and headed up into the mountains, Tommy and I, and of course his pipe. And we drove up into the mountains, parked the car, took a short walk, and there I saw the most beautiful thing in the world. These big, ugly cankers on the stems of these aspen trees. They were really quite impressive. So I fell in love with this fungus. This was the coolest thing in the world. But the summer ended, and it was time for me to go on to Washington State University to get my master's degree. And then I went to Cal Berkeley for my PhD. And I specialized in insect-associated fungi, but I wasn't able to work on Ceratocystis. That was the fungus I really wanted to work on. So I was making a bit of a reputation for myself, even as a graduate student, but there was a competing student, a rival from South Africa that was working on his PhD at the University of Minnesota. And He was quite energetic, very productive, and more productive than me, and there was no way I was going to keep up with him. But then we both finished our PhDs. He went back to South Africa, and then I went on to the University of New Hampshire. And in New Hampshire, I had to work on other things. I wasn't able to work on these insect-associated fungi at all, and certainly not Ceratocystis. So after 8 years in New Hampshire, then I came to Iowa State. And I had a little bit more flexibility on what to work on. And it took a few years, but then finally I got a couple of back-to-back grants from the National Science Foundation just to work on Ceratocystis. And that was really kind of the height of my career. I was doing what I wanted to do. I had a lot of really great graduate students. I had visiting scientists, visiting students around the world that would come to ISU, or I'd go there and we'd collaborate. My students got to travel around the world too. We had, besides these new collaborations that I met, I actually started collaborating with my rival in South Africa. So he came with his family in 1994, worked here at ISU. And then in 1997, I took my family down to South Africa on sabbatical. And things were going pretty well. We had a lot of good, productive students on both sides involved in the project. And then the competition kind of started to creep back. The rivalry came back. At that time, DNA sequencing became quite routine, and it was easy to show that a new species could be found just by simply comparing a couple of old species with each other, see that they're quite different in DNA sequence, and you name them. And I thought what they were doing with the South African group was kind of overdoing it. They were splitting species too many times based on pretty trivial characteristics. So we weren't going to get into a race with them, though. We were just going to keep our head down, do solid work, and not worry about what they were doing. We described 7 species of Ceratocystis, and they described 30. But who's counting, you know? So as for working on Ceratocystis, I wanted to revisit this Aspen fungus, the one that Tommy Hines had introduced me to 25 years earlier. And Jason Johnson was the student to look at it. He was going to look at the North American species in the Ceratocystis group. He did a really good job, and he showed that that Aspen fungus was indeed a new fungus. It had been called Ceratocystis fimbriata by Ellison Everhart. But in actuality, that Ceratocystis fimbriata was a sweet potato pathogen. I didn't know it at the time, but Halstead, not Ellison Everhart, I'm sorry, Ellison Halstead. And Halstead had been a faculty member here in the 1880s when it was Iowa Agricultural College, but that didn't mean too much to me back when I was in Colorado. So as Jason looks at this aspen fungus, he says, you know, I got good data here. It shows that only the aspen fungus can infect aspen trees, and the other fimbriata strains can't. We got an extra spore stage with this fungus on aspen. DNA sequences are different. It won't mate with the other strains of Ceratocystis. It's new. And I said, okay, what do you want to call it? And he said, I want to call it Populicula. So that's what we did. It means it's on poplars or aspen. So Ceratocystis, Populicula, J.J. Johnson, and T.C. Heron. So that name stays with it. So when you name a fungus, that authority name stays with that fungus forever. Anybody who uses that name, Ceratocystis populicula, has to include Johnson and Harrington with it, okay? I wish we would have named this fungus Ceratocystis Tommy Hinesii. So there was a problem. Somebody pointed out to me about 10 years later that Ceratocystis populicula, that name had already been used for another kind of obscure fungus, and I didn't realize that that name had been used before. Their name has priority, so our name was illegitimate. So populicula needed to be renamed. And that's an easy thing to do because all the hard work had already been done. All we had to do was publish a new name, propose a new name in a journal, and that's all there is to it. And I happen to have a student that was working on other related species of Ceratocystis, a student from Brazil. He was working with the fungus on linden trees and was going to describe that as a new species, and we were going to tack on a new name for Ceratocystis populicula at the same time. I didn't realize that the South African group was looking to do the same thing. So I come into the lab one day, and another student has his laptop there, and he's pulling something up for me to see, and he goes, you know, you're not going to like this, but those South Africans have renamed her poplar fungus. And I thought, oh, geez, this isn't fair. After Jason did all that hard work, the South Africans do nothing, and they just write down a new name, and that's it. So he shows me, he points to the article and what they call the new fungus, and they called it Ceratocystis harringtonii. And I said, those little buggers, you know, they knew I'm going to be pretty frustrated that they'd taken away the naming rights, so they named it after me. You know, they thought that would take care of it. They'll just stroke my ego, and everything will be okay. You know, but it really wasn't okay. I really wanted to rename it ourselves. We really should have named it Ceratocystis tommyheinzii to begin with, right? But we didn't. We messed up. We didn't check the background. We didn't follow the rules. They did. They got the naming rights. So they get the credit for naming it, but they named the fungus after me. Now, this is a little bit embarrassing because you're supposed to name fungi after people that have died or retired, and I think, well, this is some sort of hint. They want me to die or to retire, you know, and this is serious business here, you know, so I thought, well, maybe it's a death threat. So I didn't complain about it too much, but it is a bit embarrassing because I keep working with these fungi. You know, and then Harringtonii shows up. So it wasn't really fair for Jason and all the work he did, but there is some irony here. So remember that 1977, I fell in love with this fungus. And then 40 years later, it ends up with my name on it. And who could have imagined that? So thanks for listening. Thanks.